enough of what he can't do. Let's talk about what he can do. Let's talk about how he did it and what he did to win.
Welcome into the NFL on Fox podcast. I am Dave Helman, and a very merry draft day to you. NFL Christmas is here. Later tonight, you'll know whether you got a toy or a lump of coal in your stocking, all that good stuff. Whole league beginning the 2024 NFL draft from Detroit. We will see how it all shakes out. I'm so excited to talk about what happened instead of what might happen. We are finally at that point. I've told you throughout the week, but just a reminder, whatever happens on Thursday and over the weekend, we will have you covered on the podcast. Come back Friday. We've got a recap of the first round, whatever happens, all of the madness, all of the trades, whatever. We'll have you covered, reacting, commentary on that. And then on Monday, we'll react to the entire draft as it happened over the course of the weekend. Make sure you're subscribed on Spotify. Make sure you go Apple Podcasts, wherever you prefer. We have a YouTube channel. Maybe you've heard me mention it, NFL on Fox. And of course, all of our social channels at NFL on Fox Pod. So much content coming your way over the weekend. We've got you covered after the draft. But before the draft, one more really exciting piece of content. I mentioned this before, really pumped for it. Had a chance to sit down with former Panthers and Commanders head coach Ron Rivera. Like I said, not often you get to talk to somebody that's made the call on draft night, helped decide who to pick, which player, argued for their guys, debated trading up, trading down, all that fun stuff that goes into the draft and why we love it. Ron Rivera lived it with two different franchises. A really fun conversation with him coming up. I enjoyed it. Take a listen.
All right, we've teased it a lot because I'm so excited about it. An opportunity to talk to somebody at this time of year with the NFL draft having arrived. There just aren't very many people that can give you this sort of insight, this sort of behind the scenes knowledge of what's about to happen. Ron Rivera joining the show. Thank you so much, Ron. I already said it before we started recording, but it's so great to have you on. So great to talk to you.
No, thanks, Dave. I appreciate you guys having me. This is cool.
So this is something I've always been so curious about. I've worked around the NFL for 10 plus years. I worked for an NFL team at one point. I'm always so curious. This week of the draft, obviously we know there's a lot of traveling and a lot of film review that goes on during the draft process. But from a coaching and front office perspective, what is the last week of this NFL draft cycle like for a front office?
Wow. Well, Dave, really starts again, obviously what happens at the end of the NFL season, and it's going right into into probably the most important part of it, and that's the scouting aspect of it. So as they're going through the scouting aspect for the first couple of months, everything's about, who are the guys that we've got to pay attention to, who are the guys that are going to fit on our board. We're going out and we're investigating these guys. Now, all of a sudden, we start setting our board, and the board starts to get set 2.5 to 3 weeks before you get to the draft week. So by the time you get to draft week, now the board is set. And you're going through it one last time, trying to make sure you have every conversation you could possibly have on every guy that's on your board. What's interesting is there'll be about 350 to 370 guys drafted based on how many draft picks there are. And what everybody has on their board, though, is they don't have that many guys as far as the actual board itself. They have who they believe the top maybe 150 to 200 guys are, and they have them ranked from the best player on their board to the last player on their board, from the first round all the way to the 7th round. And then on another board, they have their free agencies, their preferred free agencies, guys that they would bring in for camps, guys that they won't consider. And again, now that that's all set and put into place, now it's just a matter of having your discussions as to what potentially could happen. Each team will probably go through a couple of mock drafts. They'll go through kind of a conversation as to who they think other teams are going to pick and how that will impact who they want to pick. So this is a very interesting time these next few days leading up to Thursday night.
It reminds me a lot of being in school and like having tests or finals or something. Like, is there an element, like, as you get closer, as the draft gets there, where it's like, okay, I either know it or I don't. There's no
Hmm.
more work I can do,
Right.
or are you the type that is just cramming in every last second until you're actually on the clock?
Well, what happened for what way we did it was we were always, set with our board, but as players are being picked, it changes what potentially could happen to you. And now you're looking at other things that you have, and even some of the analytics that have been put together on these guys. You will have that information as your pick gets closer, and as guys get taken off, you just basically remove them from your sheet, and now you move down to the next guy. So again, this is one of those things where you have to react to what's happened in front of you, as opposed to just saying, "Oh, this is our guy." No, because that guy, he may be taken by somebody else. You've got to make sure you have your next guy ready to go.
So I think there's a really interesting parallel between you and this year's draft, just because what's about to happen with the Chicago Bears and
Mhm.
Caleb Williams reminds me a good amount of your time in Carolina when y'all drafted Cam Newton in 2011. It was a pretty clear-cut decision at the top of the board, but that's only so much of it. You're making a
Mhm.
franchise-altering pick. You need this guy to sort of be the culture changer in a new program and a new direction. I'm just curious for your memories, your perspective of when, even as obvious as it looked from the outside, when did
Mhm.
y'all know Cam was your guy? And even after you come to that decision, what is the focus after that up until you get him in the building?
Well, what happened for us first and foremost was, had to go through the list of quarterbacks. That list was pretty good, but it's nothing like this year's list. This year's list is pretty special, I think. But as we were going through it, obviously Cam was at the top of our board to begin with. We started all our work on him. I think Marty Herney did the most work of anybody of that group, but he was truly sold on Cam probably a month as we were, within the first month, just because of everything that we saw. But you can't go in and say, hey, we're sold that early without doing every bit of work you could. And so for the next couple of months, everything was about, find out what he can't do. Let's find out what he's not capable of. And let's see how that's going to impact us. And then as we got ready and we got closer to the draft, now it was about, okay, what can he do? What are the skill sets that he has? What does he bring to the table? Okay, now, does that fit what we want to do, and how does it fit? And now those things that don't work for us, can we improve those things, or those are things we didn't have to worry about? I mean, there were so many questions like that we had to answer to figure out whether or not he was our guy. But I will, honestly, I would say within the last 3 weeks, we were 100% sure he was our guy. And then the final thing was a week before the draft, Marty flew out, visited with Cam and his family. And then after Marty did, a couple days later, just before the draft, a week before the draft, I flew out, met with him and his family. And when we got back, we talked about this, and we knew that he was going to be our guy. I mean, everything about him told us he was the fit for Carolina.
Just out of curiosity, you were a longtime player for the Chicago Bears. You're obviously on that 85 Bears team that is talked about so much. Is with all the stops you've made in the NFL since then as a coach, but what's your level of intrigue in what's about to happen in Chicago? I mean, I would imagine that resonates with you a little bit.
It does. It really does. And I'll tell you, they've had a really good offseason. They really have. They've added on to their group of young, talented players by bringing in some veteran guys that they're going to surround this young quarterback with. I really believe that, Caleb is going to be their pick. I think going out and adding the talent that they've had on the offensive side, knowing that they got to also help to improve and add some more depth on their offense. As far as their offensive line is concerned, maybe add one more playmaker and another young wide receiver to go with that veteran group led by DJ Moore. I think, again, making sure that running game is in place, because play action is also going to be one of those really strong things that's going to help this young quarterback. And then defensively, last year it really started with the trade that was made to bring Montez Sweat to Chicago, and we saw the improvement right away on that defense because of who Montez is, an explosive, dynamic football player, a guy that really added on to what they want to do on the defensive side. So I think that they've done some really good things this year, and I'm very interested just because of, again, as a former Bear, it's and you play for that team for 9 seasons, it's kind of hard not to cheer for them. So I'm hoping that they have a really good draft. I really do believe Caleb's going to be the pick.
One thing I wanted to ask you about, and again, it's such a unique perspective talking to somebody that not only had a seat in an NFL war room, but had input into the decision-making process. I'm just curious, with the number of drafts that you've gone through, all, assistant coach all the way up to head coach and in between, is there any sort of learning curve of being in a war room of the draft process that you got better at, I guess, over the course of the years? Or along the same lines, in addition, what's something that the average person doesn't realize about what the war room is like during the 3 days of the draft?
Well, probably the biggest thing that you learn right away is that you've got to make sure that you have somebody else that you would take with that pick. What people don't realize is you just can't pick who you want. You pick who's available. And the question really that comes up is, are you picking for need or are you picking best player available? And that's where really the decision-making comes into it. And that's always the big debate and big discussion. And that's really where it can get heated at times is, because sometimes people believe, oh, you don't shop hungry. You don't pick based on need. You pick on based on availability. Is the best player there? And does it matter if it's by position? Okay, some people think of it that way and look at it that way. Other people goes, no, we've got to fill this need. Well, there's problems with both of them. Problems with filling needs is sometimes you may draft a guy sooner than you should. Whereas if you're picking best player available, you may not be filling the need that you have. So again, it's kind of that fine line as to which way do you go with it. I mean, both has a benefit to it and both has a little negative to it. That's always one of the huge discussions. Always saying, well, our guy's on the board. Let's see if we can make a trade. Now, are you trading for value or are you trading because you don't believe the guys that are there fit what you want at that price level? And so you don't want to spend, an early second round pick on these group of guys. Let's go back, get some more draft equity, and let's pick another guy that fits where we think he belongs. That's another way to look at things. So there's always those conversations that are constantly going on. Trade talk is constantly going on. You're always trying to see if you can get more picks, get more value for where you are. So it's a very intriguing time because you've got to be able to navigate through, the opportunities as to whether or not we can get players that can come in and help us now, or are these guys that'll help us in the future.
I've got to imagine as a head coach, you've been on both sides of that, right? Like,
yes.
It's got to be tough. It's got to be tough as a head coach to be like, no, but you don't understand.
I got to coach this team when we get to training camp. So how do you kind of strike that balance? And I mean, it's completely justifiable, in my opinion, as the head coach to want the guy that you need more than the guy that might pay benefits in the long term. I understand the importance of both, but when you're the guy whose name is going to be on the record, how do you kind of strike that balance and fight that urge?
Well, the first thing you always have to remember is what we're about to do going to help the football team the most. It can't be about just you as, this is about me, what I want. This has to be what suits us the best, what fits us the best, what helps us the best. That's the most important thing when you go into a draft is you've always got to believe that whatever you guys do, it's going to help the team the most. And so I've always tried to look at it that way. And that was always something that I kept in mind during my conversation. Because at the end of the day, what you want to make sure is everybody believes in what you've just done. And so as we've gone through that process, we try to make sure that, when you get close to your pick, let's say you're 10 picks out, you start putting a list of 10 players up. And as those players get picked, you remove those guys. And probably by the time it gets to your pick, you've got about a clump of about 3 to 5 guys still available. Now, from that group of guys, you pick the guy that you guys believe collectively that this guy fits us the most. This is the guy that's going to bring the most value to our football team and make the biggest impact.
There's a couple of teams, Chicago, Washington, where the choice in front of them looks pretty obvious. It's a quarterback. It depends on which one they like. But I'm curious about other teams that might be searching for that quarterback in this draft, whether it's a team that wants to trade up, like potentially Minnesota, or maybe it's just a team that's hoping the right guy falls to them. I'm curious for your perspective on that decision where a quarterback is something that could be in the cards, but it's not really up to you. How do you weigh how much you like the player versus the plan of action to get that player?
See, this is a quarterback-driven league. It really is. If you have your quarterback, your franchise guy, everything else becomes easy. Everything is built around this guy more so than anything else We've seen it now over and over and over. This is not like back in the day where you have a true game manager as your quarterback, okay? Baltimore won a championship with a quarterback that did a great job of managing it. Tampa Bay did the same thing. But then you turn around and you look at what's happened in the last, 5, 6, 7 Super Bowls, and those are won by teams with quarterbacks that took the game over. And so you've got to find that guy. Last year, one of the great, things that happened for Houston was they found a guy in C.J. Stroud. Okay, now this guy is going to be their guy for the next, hopefully 10, 12, 14 years for them. And they'll build their team around it. But having that guy now gives you the ability to go out and continue to build your team, add players. And if you make the right decisions at the right time, they can sustain that as a dynasty. We saw that happen in New England. We're seeing that right now with Kansas City. Why? Because they have their quarterback. The decision has to be made. Is it time to get that guy? Minnesota is a team, I think, that has an opportunity to potentially move up in the draft because, again, they've got some pretty good pieces in place. But the thing that they don't have right now is they don't have that franchise guy that can be there for the next 10, 12 years. So, yeah, that's a team I think that really may be one of those guys that can come up and move up. Another one I think interesting is New England. I know they got Jacoby Brissett, who's a very good football player, and I think is going to become a guy that can be there for a while in the right situation. So if they draft a young quarterback early, Jacoby will probably start off as the guy. He'll mentor this guy, bring him along gradually, but I think he can be a guy that can be there for a number of years. So they're not necessarily in the need to have to go up and get somebody, but that might be a team that if the right guy falls to them, they may draft this guy instead.
I'm so curious about that. And it kind of goes back to what you say, like these teams, the number of players they're willing to pick is always smaller than what we on the outside see. Right. So New England is a great example. I'd love your perspective on it. They pick third. Maybe the quarterback they love is there at 3, and maybe the 2 guys that they really felt great about go ahead of them.
Right.
Can you walk through what that might look like on the insider's perspective? Because I think it's oversimplifying it to just say, oh, they'll pick a quarterback. I mean, How much does it depend on the guy that'll be there as opposed to what the other options could be? Well,
if their guy, let's say their guy is Drake May, and again, Washington doesn't take him, then he's their guy. They draft him. But if Drake is their guy and he does get drafted, now what they could do is potentially say, okay, the next 3 guys that we have on our board are guys that we like, but we don't want to take at 3. Maybe there's somebody they can trade backwards with, okay? And again, perhaps the Giants might be a team, perhaps, they're willing to go all the way back to where Minnesota is and may decide that that's the way to go backwards. Now, if those guys that they have listed next as their number 3, 4, and 5 quarterback is available, now they take the quarterback, but at the same time, they've also gotten more draft capital. Okay, so again, that's something they have to think about. But if you're sitting at number 3 and you're New England and all of a sudden, Harrison's there at wide receiver, which more than likely he's going to be there. Do you take him? Because he is dynamic. He's a guy that's going to come in and make an impact, and he's going to be a long-time starter in this league who should have a great career. So those are all things you have to discuss and decide as to whether or not now's the time to strike and fortify that position, or now is the time to strike and make a decision on the quarterback that could be your franchise guy for the next 10 to 12 to 14 years.
Which it goes back to the amount of prep involved that you could potentially be making a franchise-altering decision in the 10 minutes that you have on the clock after the team in front of you makes that choice.
But the truth is, they're having a discussion right now, probably. They probably are, because they've probably gone through the scenarios, okay? I mean, again, Caleb Williams should be the first pick. And if he's not and he falls to number 2, he should be the second pick. And if he's not and you're sitting there and you're New England, you're taking him. I mean, that's probably not even a scenario to talk about, but just in case. But they've probably talked about all that stuff. And you have to be honest and say, hey, if this is the guy that's going to alter everything, change, this is the guy we have to take. So, again, they've probably sat there and they're talking about 2 or 3 of these quarterbacks. They're probably trying to decide which of those 2 or 3 of those quarterbacks can be the franchise guy. And if that guy is available and ready, let's take him. And if they, again, as I said, if they only believe 2 guys can do it, those guys that are number 3, 4, and 5 for them, they're going to go backwards. They're going to try and get more draft capital. And what happens is, if that guy just happens to be there, one of those 3 guys, they'll take that guy then, but also know that they've also gotten more draft capital to go forward.
I don't know if it would be as shocking as Caleb Williams not going number 1 overall, but do you ever remember something from your time running a draft where you were like, holy crap, this guy's here? Like, no, we didn't run a simulation that was prepared for this possibility.
No, not necessarily. You know, we try to think of all those things and as to who would and wouldn't be there. The one that has got us more than anything else is the guy that we wanted to take was taken just before it. That's the one that really hurts. You really like those guys. You really believe in those guys. And you're set to take them, and they get taken just right literally in front of you. And you go sit there, oh my gosh, that guy would have helped us. That guy would have made the impact that we need. And sure enough, you watch him throughout his career and you see that he has a great rookie year, and then he goes on to be an all-pro, and you just go, God, we were right. But, you know, that's the fortunes of football. And that's the thing people don't understand. You know, say, oh, well, you should have drafted that guy. Well, we didn't have a chance to. It's when you have a chance to draft a guy and you don't pick the guy, that's where you start getting yourself in trouble. And again, that usually happens when you're drafting for need more so than you are drafting best player available.
Does anybody stand out for you as a guy who you just remember watching their career, knowing that, you know, they went off the board 1 spot ahead of you?
You know, there's been so many, it's hard to pick one guy in particular, but you sit there and you think of those guys constantly because, you know, you're watching them play and you're on tape and say, oh yeah, we knew that guy would be really special. Oh my gosh. You know, and that's what drives you nuts, you know, what could have been.
So I want to go back to I'm so fascinated by the intricacy of the draft process, and I'm curious for your perspective on, you mentioned, you know, having everybody in alignment, getting everybody on the same page with the plan of action. You think about, you know, NFL teams employ dozens of scouts that start work on this in August, and the general managers involved. The coaching staff is obviously worried about the current season. Then they get involved when the draft process starts. What is the process like of marrying all of those aspects? And in your experience, you know, what's the best that it's worked for you?
Well, I'll give you a great example. It was Luke Kuechly. Luke Kuechly's sophomore year was much better than his junior year. Part of it was the players that were in front of him. He had 2 defensive tackles. One was taken in the first round, B.J. Raji, and another one was taken in the 3rd round. So his junior year, he didn't have those big guys in front of him, so he was making more plays beyond the line of scrimmage, not at it or behind it. Whereas his sophomore year, he was making all his plays at the line of scrimmage, behind the line of scrimmage, because he had those big guys making an impact. Without him, he was still making plays, and a lot of them, but he was making them beyond the line of scrimmage. And so a couple of our scouts said, well, he's lost something already. And, you know, we're sitting there going, what are you talking about? Well, look at his tackles. And I started thinking, So as I watched some tape, you know, it dawns on me, wait a minute. He doesn't have the guys he had in front of him. So that became a huge discussion for us for whatever reason. But eventually we got back to the place we needed to be to make Luke our 1st round pick that year, you know, back in 2012. I mean, he was one of those guys that if all of a sudden you put the tape on from his junior year and you didn't go back to his sophomore year, you would have never realized that, hey, you know, when he's got the right kind of situation in front of him, the dude's going to make every play at or behind the line of scrimmage, not beyond it. So again, you got to make sure you go through all the little details and you pay attention to everything. You know, we got caught up on Cam Newton about what he couldn't do for 2 months, you know, and everybody was getting down on him. But then the discussion came, what can he do and what has he done? And that was, he won at every level. He won in high school. He won in college, in junior college. He won in major college football. And everything he did, what did he do? He was a great leader. He was a dynamic runner. He was a tremendous passer. He was a playmaker. All those things were things that played in and factored in our decision-making. And we also believed he was a guy that could impact culture. And he came in and did those things we needed. And as I've said before, unfortunately, the shoulder injury, I think, is one of the things that really unrailed his career. This is a guy that could still be playing because he had that tremendous athletic ability and skill set.
Luke Kuechly is such a perfect example. I mean, just a phenomenal player, slam dunk draft pick. one of the best linebackers of his generation. And it leads into what I wanted to ask you about this conversation that happens every spring around this time about positional value.
Mm-hmm.
The example I wrote up is the Lions caught hell last year for drafting a running back and a linebacker in the first round. On the flip side, I mean, first of all, a good player is a good player, right?
Yep.
And if you find a Luke Kuechly, you're never going to second guess that decision. But I'm curious where you come down on that and how much. I do think it's something you have to consider when you think about the way contracts are slotted and stuff like that. But I'd be curious where a longtime coach comes down on how much you should pay attention to positional value versus just get good players on our team.
Well, I think if you really look at where they picked those guys, it's not like they picked them in the first 5 or 6 picks. And that's usually where everybody starts worrying about positional value when it comes to running back. Okay. But they took them later in the draft in the first round. Okay. Then they went and got the linebacker, I think somewhere at 27 or something like that later in.
It was in the 20s. Yeah. It was in the 20s.
But you talked about 2 guys that they knew would come in, have the impact, believe they would have the impact that they needed to have them. And again, at that point, it's not necessarily positional value as much as those were guys that they believe were not just positional value guys for them, taking them where they did, but they were also the value was more so than anything else was they filled the need. They filled the need. They got a dynamic runner, a guy that could do more than just one thing, and that was a guy that could be involved in the game first, second, third downs. Then they went out and got a linebacker that not only could make plays, but also could help set the tone and tempo for the defense. Very smart football player, help make all the calls, get all the checks right, okay? Anticipate, make plays that can make impacts on the game. That's important. Those are the kind of guys you've got to have.
So do you find it like the cliche is that it's like the coaches against the nerds when you have these conversations?
Yes.
Do you find that does it split along those lines, or is it a little bit more nuanced than that?
No, that does split on those lines sometimes, because what happens, and I don't necessarily want to call them nerds as much as, I want to call them information gatherers, guys that put all puts all that work in. I mean, these scouts are tremendous. These guys dig up everything. But we also have the analytics side that go out and they look at how these guys impact games based on certain situations, circumstances. They talk about what the value is for the position. And these are all things you have to take into consideration because, to be quite honest, because, running backs aren't being paid what they used to be paid. If you take a guy like that in the first round, they're not going to have that kind of impact on your salary cap. Okay, and so is it valuable to take a guy? Well, you take a guy because he's going to help your football team be a better team. That's the best reason. But along the way, one of the nice impacts are their impact on the salary cap is not going to be as high. That could be a consideration, something that you can think about when it comes time to deciding as to whether or not you take that guy. But, that's not the reason you make your decisions, in my opinion, is based on the salary. This is a guy that, does he impact us? Does he impact us in a way that we're going to win football games? Okay, and then maybe down the line, as you go through that checklist, you might talk about salary.
All right, I'm going to get you out of here really quickly. We appreciate the time. Like I said, I wanted to get at least one good story out of you, though. I mean, you oversaw so many drafts, and I mean, both the Panthers and the Commanders. You drafted some quality players at the top and the bottom over your time doing this. For starters, is there a guy that you remember just like a really great conversation for? People love to say pound the table. Did you ever have to stand on the table, or do you remember somebody doing that for a guy and, he wound up being this big time contributor?
It's funny because everything goes back to Cam Newton and to Luke Kuechly. I think that the 2 most important picks that I was involved with in my time in Carolina, because those guys were both really pretty much the anchors to the success we had there. And the decisions to draft both those guys was always a huge decision. I mean, we had to go through, just mounds and mounds of work to get to where we were. And then the discussions and the arguments, that went along with them was because, these were things that needed to be discussed. So it always goes back to them, because those 2 guys, they laid the groundwork for who we were going to become. And they were our 2 most important picks. They were our 2 most important leaders. And I do remember one day, we were talking about Cam, And, and we were really negative about it. Some of our guys kept saying, well, he can't do this, doesn't have that ability. And I just kind of, it was very colorful language, what I had to say. And I said, enough of what he can't do. Let's talk about what he can do. Let's talk about how he did it and what he did to win. I mean, and it was one of those things that just kind of putting it that way got us all on the right track. And I really believe we made the best decision for the franchise, and it showed. It showed by our 5th season, we were in the Super Bowl. I would have loved to have won it, obviously, because that was a good team. We had very good team, and it could have gone down as a team that a lot of people, would truly remember for the right reasons, that was winning it all. And unfortunately, we didn't do it.
I know you didn't win the game, but I promise you people still remember that Panthers team. I mean, absolutely phenomenal team. And one last thing for you. I talk to so many players, and I'm always very interested in the way that guys, like, they remember the staff who drafted them. That's the team that gave me my shot in the NFL. Yep. Do you find that those bonds kind of linger? I mean, especially when you make a home run pick like a Cam or a Luke Kuechly, that, yes, it bonds you to the staff, it bonds you to the player.
I'll give you a great story about bonding with a player. One of my all-time favorites was when we drafted Christian McCaffrey. And that was a lot of work. Really, we wanted to make sure we got it right. And when we dug deep down, our analytics guy came up with a really good piece of analytics that really helped us to secure the decision. And that was, in his time as a running back at Stanford, his sophomore and junior season, he ran between the tackles more than anybody else. Anybody, even Derrick Henry, he ran between the tackles more than anybody else and had the career he had in college football. So we draft him first. So this past season, we're playing the 49ers, on their march to the Super Bowl. We play them at home. They beat us. After the game, Christian comes over and, we talk for about a good 5 minutes on the field after the game. And I said to him, I said, Christian, one of the biggest mistakes I made was I didn't ask you for an autograph. And he started laughing. He said, Coach, done. Well, he took that jersey he wore. He had the trainer seal it for him. But before he sealed it, he signed it, to Coach, thanks for taking the chance. And so I called him. I said, thanks for sending this, but just remember, I didn't think it was that big of a risk. I didn't think it was that big of a chance. I really thought you were going to be the player that you are today, man. Congratulations. So that's kind of how, something like that creates those bonds, is that you give a guy a chance. And some guys look at it like, wow, that was a big chance. It wasn't a big chance, because he's who he is, because of how hard he works, because of the way he was brought up, the way he did things. I mean, he's a tremendous football player. And again, he'll always go down as one of my favorite guys as well.
That's the stuff we're here for. That's great stuff. And like I said, I think it plays out all over the league. No matter how it ended for Christian McCaffrey in Carolina, I just think that those moments, it seems like they bond people. And I think you understand why, for sure.
No, they do, Dave. They're really doing it. It's something that's really cool that people don't understand, that when you come across, players, you're going to find some guys that really touch certain parts of your football team and make the kind of impact you want. He was a great example for all of our young guys that came in at, hey, this is how you do it. You do it this way. You prepare yourself this way. You get yourself ready to do the right things, and you give yourself a chance to have a great career.
It's awesome stuff. And it's a good point. Again, there's so many intangibles that go into this that, you could spend all day talking about it. I appreciate you giving us some of your time, Ron. It's been a blast talking to you. Enjoy the draft. Enjoy everything that's coming up for you this week. I appreciate the time, man. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks one more time to Ron Rivera, and thank you for following me on this journey to the draft. It has felt like a long time coming, but we're here. I've already told you. You make sure you're back here on Friday and on Monday as we recap this whole thing. Make sure you throw us a subscribe, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, so that you're ready for it. But until then, I'll see you on the other side of the first round. There's nothing left to do now but wait and see. Best weekend of the offseason. I'll continue to say it. So much fun. May the odds be in your favor. May your team take the guy that you love. May your rivals take the guy that you don't love. However it might play out, may it be a wonderful 2024 draft for you and your team. I appreciate it. We'll be back tomorrow to talk you through the first round. Thanks as always, and I'll talk to y'all soon.